Hello, welcome to Surface Sessions number 3. How well does Pro Tools run on the Surface Pro 3? Well, let's find out. Pro Tools. This is one of the more fussy bits of music software, so let's see how it flies. Well, first of all, can we run it just on the Surface without having to plug anything else in? Well, you'll need your iLock, which is the authorization for Pro Tools, so that can use up our single USB slot there. But Pro Tools can't run without an audio interface. It needs, at the very least, an ASIO driver in order to function. It won't open otherwise. Now, luckily, there's a very cool utility called ASIO for All, which allows you to wrap up normal Windows drivers into an ASIO driver that software like Pro Tools can understand, which is great. So we can use it by itself, just with the Surface, nothing else other than the iLock attached, and it will work. Ta-da! So that's great. We can totally use it without an audio interface, just like this. Plug in your headphones and off you go. So you'll notice that as the demo song is loaded, that Pro Tools has actually opened in quite a strange sort of resolution. It's maximized according to the buttons at the top, but it's only actually filling up a small portion of the screen. And everything on it is really very small, which kind of demonstrates the resolution of the screen, but also how Pro Tools is kind of a bit flummoxed by it. But with a quick couple of taps on there, and then to re-maximize it, it then finds itself again. But as you can see, the detail of everything is quite extraordinary. If we look at the mixer view, you'll see that we can get a whole 27 faders all the way across this screen, which are a little bit small for grabbing, but you know, not impossible by any stretch. And what we find actually, if we delve into the settings, that this isn't even as small as it can go, because Windows has what's called desktop scaling, where it can enlarge the screen to make it more usable. And as it is at the moment, it's set to sort of 3 or 4 settings, so it's actually set quite large. If we go into the display settings, I can show you what I mean. Here, smaller and larger. So actually, if we take that all the way down to the bottom and apply that, you'll see that down here the taskbar rather, has got much smaller. If we open up Pro Tools, it's now kind of impossibly small. And if we open up the mixer, you've now got about 40 odd faders all the way across, which are getting seriously small for your fingers, but not for the pen. And actually this may be where the pen is going to start coming in useful if you want to work at these sorts of resolutions. One other thing, which is the menu system at the top is a bit screwed up. It's probably, again, the resolution, something to do with that. But if you go back into the display settings and you change this setting here, which is the text size for title bars, hit apply, then it sorts it out. It doesn't matter what you change it to. Every time you come back into Pro Tools, it will be screwed up, but if you do that, it will then come back to itself at the top. Does that really matter? Well, if you know what the menus are, it doesn't really matter. It's just a slight bit of weirdness, which I can't see as anything to do with the Surface as such, just something to do with the resolution and how Pro Tools deals with that. Quality of playback through the onboard speakers, it's alright. It's a bit like a laptop, isn't it? Sounds okay. Here's a bit of an oddity, which is when you plug the headphones in. If I can find the socket, there it is. Nothing happens, which is nice. As far as I can work out, it's because the Surface or Windows treats the headphone and the speakers out within the Surface as completely different entities. So in order for it to use the headphone socket, use this line out socket here, we have to change the priority of the audio to headphones. The problem is that Pro Tools is only seeing what the ASIO for All wrapper is telling it. And the wrapper sees all of these different inputs and outputs. It sees a mic in at the front, a stereo input, another mic input. It sees an audio output, which is the speakers, and a second audio output, which is the headphones, because they're all seen individually. So Pro Tools doesn't know or doesn't care that you've plugged that cable in, you have to tell it which output to use. So you can open up the ASIO for all settings by an icon by the clock down here. But whenever you do so, Pro Tools then says, oh, I've lost communication with the device, or something has changed and I need to restart and start again. So it's not very friendly at you changing settings. But you can go in here and select the second output and then shut it down, not shut the computer down, but shut down Pro Tools, start that up again, and it should start using that as a headphone output. It may be that there's an easier, better or simpler way to do that. I mean, for instance, you can have both outputs selected and then change it within Pro Tools so you can swap between one and the other. But that somehow seems even more complicated. And now, with a bit of luck, it should play out of the speakers I've got up here. Hooray! Now if I pull this out, will it ruin everything? Yeah. Pro Tools isn't quite sure what's happening and it's had thrown a bit of a wobbly. Yeah, so not exactly graceful, but Pro Tools can work with the onboard sound with the ASIO for All wrapper, and it comes out the right places. It's just a bit of a faff. It's just a bit of a fiddle, but you know, not insurmountable, so you can get on with that. It's not a massive thing. The better alternative then would be to use a USB audio interface like this one. This is the Fast Track Duo from Avid themselves. So you'd expect it to work really, and it does very well. But of course we run into our single USB socket problem. But never mind, we're going to plug in a hub and see if we can get things to work through that. So I've got a simple 4-port hub here, nothing flashy about it. It's not powered or anything like that. We'll jam that in the side. Add the eye lock. That works okay. Add the audio interface. Plug that in. Lights come on. I have already installed the drivers. So we've got that running through there, through there, through there. So now it's coming through the fast track, which is much better. Quality of the audio is better, the control is better, the reliability is going to be better, and you're also going to be able to put some decent inputs into the front here. So, you know, that's always going to be the happier solution. But, you know, if you're on the train, you need to do some mixing, you can sit there with the pen and with Pro Tools, pair of headphones on the side, and that's going to work for you, which is pretty groovy. So Pro Tools on the whole actually works really well with touch. I can select things, I can move them about. I can tap things over here that make things turn on and turn off. It's obviously a bit fiddly because of the resolution. If we look at the mixer, this is really quite easy to grab faders and move them around, and to load up a plugin or something, and then change parameters. But my fat fingers are getting in the way all the time, so maybe this is a perfect opportunity to use the pen. And if you get down and dirty with the pen in here, that is a far, far better experience, because you can see what's going on, you've got very fine accuracy on what it is you're trying to do, and you can see that the mouse pointer changes as you move this around. So when you start to hover just over the top here, then it starts to change. So particularly if we use the toolbar, you've got the hand grab at the top, it then turns into a cursor, and at the sides it turns into the trim tool. So that's enormously useful. So the pen, I think, is a perfect tool for Pro Tools on this. So you could have it sitting on your lap, and you could be moving things around and tapping away and changing things, back in the mixer, make fine adjustments to everything. It's brilliant. You can fly around the screen and do whatever you need to do with it. The workflow is very, very easy, and you're very much involved in what you're doing. It's not like having a mouse where you're sat back and watching things unfurl on the screen. You're very much getting your head in there and and getting on with things, which I think is a really interesting and perhaps a different way of working to what many people will be used to doing. But it works just so brilliantly well that it's got to be a goer, I think. I'm going to draw on automation, like for instance volume. Either with a line or freehand. I mean, how great is that? One thing that it is a little bit different is if you're working with the pen, you're kind of likely to discard the keyboard because you're going to be perhaps leaning over and getting into it. The keyboard's going to start getting in the way, and maybe you're going to be angling it down, and you could be drawing on it like this. And so what you lose is access to those all-important keyboard shortcuts, and Pro Tools users are completely mad passionate about their keyboard shortcuts. So that's a bit of a workflow issue, and what I think you need, because you have the on-screen keyboard, but that's, you know, copy and paste, yeah, that can kind of work, but this has already taken up half of your workspace. So I don't know whether that's, you know, it's a way of doing it, but it's not that useful. And again, all the keys aren't present. So perhaps what would be good would be to have a row of hotkeys, a row of sort of defined shortcuts that you could perhaps put along the taskbar here. So for simple things like copy and paste, but also for more elaborate things like changing the tool nib or shortcuts to other processes, even just bringing up, I mean, how do I now bring up the mix window? I've got to find the right window, bring up mix window, because I've now lost my shortcut to it. You know, that's no good. Whereas a touch of a button on the screen somewhere, maybe down the side or along the taskbar at the bottom, would be a brilliant way of swapping between things or triggering events, or even perhaps even creating macros. If there's a lot of processes or editing that you go through time and time again, you can create a button for it and press that, and it would do that straight away. You know, that would be a wonderful thing to have, and it must be possible. I mean, I have seen some third-party kind of design your own keyboard, virtual keyboards, which I think could probably do it, but they all looked a bit kind of rubbishy, so I'm not inclined to want to put that sort of software on my system. But with the virtual keyboard that you have and the different versions of keyboard that you have for this, surely there has to be something you can do to customize a number of shortcuts and have them always available, always on top. Got to be, hasn't there? I mean, that's what you find with things like the Raven that people keep going on about. It's all the macros. It's the toolbar. Same with the D-Touch software. That's exactly what people find really, really good about it, is the workflow that can be created by having these macros available to your fingertips. So perfect for this. Just a little toolbar down here, bang, 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 a bunch of buttons that I can program to be whatever I want them to be, and you can then fly around Pro Tools. Looking at the performance of the Surface Pro 3 with Pro Tools, we have this torture test we run called a deverb test, or a version of that a lot of Pro Tools users use. And this has got 96 tracks of audio, all with a whole stack of deverbs running on it. And the test is really just to check for errors. It's not really a comparison performance test, but it does give us some idea. When we run it on the Pro Tools PC, which is based on a Core i7-4790K, so a top-of-the-range desktop Haswell processor, it usually runs at about 70 to 75% system usage. On here, it runs at around sort of 80 to 90. It varies a little bit. But you've got smooth playback, and that's at 64 samples. So for a Core i5, and that's an Ultrabook Core i5 processor, that's actually really impressive. You can't do a lot else while this is going on. There's no headroom for doing anything else, as there is on the desktop computer. You can still move around and do other things. On here, the system is flat out, and I can hear that the fan started to come on, so the system is hotting up and running at really its full potential at this point. But the fact that it can do that is really impressive. If you try to run the same test on the onboard audio, it just can't cope with it. It doesn't know whether it's sort of coming or going. You just get a splurt of playback, and then it stops, and a splurt, and then it stops, with no actual playback actually occurring. It's just not able to deal with it. But that's because the onboard sound is not designed to deal with this kind of intensive audio playback, whereas an audio interface like this most certainly is. I should also stress that there's been absolutely no tweaking done to this system. This is running just as it is out of the box. You may have noticed when Pro Tools started up, the screen got brighter because it changed the power profile as it started to load up. So I've done no tweaking at all. And we're going to do a whole nother video on performance testing and tweaking and getting down to all of those particular bits. So considering the fact that everything is still on and everything is still going on in the background, this is great performance. I did have one problem when playing this back, is that I got a notification about somebody's birthday that just popped up from the calendar, which is very helpful. But there is, in the settings on the side, a notifications button where you can just hide notifications for a few hours, which is very, very useful if you're doing music and you don't want to be interrupted by some numpty notification about your score in Doodle God or something else has not gone very well. I've seen some videos online where people with i7 versions of the Surface, this is an i5, people with i7 versions have been encountering some CPU throttling problems. This is where the CPU steps down in speed to prevent overheating, which results ultimately in lower performance. I'm happy to say that I've not seen any of that behaviour at all, and if I run our torture test here, as it goes steaming up into the 80s and 90s, and bring in the Intel Extreme tuning utility, which is a great little monitoring piece of software, which is what they used in their video, I can see that it's running at about sort of 90% CPU utilization. The temperature is around 75 degrees, the fan has come on, the processor frequency, which could go up to 2.9, is running at about 2.6, which is fine, and I'm seeing no drop in performance. Everything is still running. Pro Tools is running in the background, happily doing its thing. You can see the graph of temperature and utilization and frequency, and the frequency is staying more or less constant. So I'm not experiencing this drop in performance that other people have seen with i7s. I don't know whether it's because of the application they're using, or whether it's the i7 processor is particularly hot, or whether they're benchmarking graphics and frames per second as opposed to just CPU utilization. I don't know. But I'll look into that every time we do performance testing. We'll be looking at that and seeing if anything like that occurs. But at the moment, it's all good. I don't know what else to say. It's all good. So let's see how well it runs all these things off the USB port without any external power. So we're going to pull the power supply out, so it's running purely on battery now, and the iLock and the audio interface are working fine. So it's completely capable of doing that. If we get out of here and attach a MIDI keyboard, let's say something chunky like Base Station 2. So there we go, all the lights came on, so that's fine. Just using it as a MIDI controller, not as a synth. It's got no output plugged in. Let's turn on Pro Tools and see what it thinks about that. Well, you can see the iLock has turned itself off, which is interesting. So power has obviously been shifted within this in order to get that to go. But I think if we take it out, put it back in, it should come back on. But Pro Tools isn't particularly impressed by that. Oh, yes, no, yes, yes, oh, yes, it'll give it a go. So yeah, that's the base station attached, the audio interface attached, and the iLock. And that seems to be working okay. If I plug in a USB drive, see what happens then. Okay, the iLock thinks about it. Pro Tools says it can't connect, but the drive comes up. Oh, oh, sort of. Okay, so we've sort of reached some kind of of issue there where it's just not quite coping with it enough. So what we find then is that without power, it is quite happy to take a keyboard and an audio interface and an iLock, but sort of only just. And in fact, in previous tests, I've had Pro Tools bomb out a couple of times saying it can no longer find the Fast Track Duo. So, but that said, the base station is quite an intense keyboard. It needs a lot of power, got a lot of stuff going on. It's actually generating sound. So with a more of a dummy MIDI keyboard, you're not going to have that as a problem. Ah, you see, there we go. So the Fast Track now has bombed out, and that would be, I believe, because of the base station 2. I've never had a problem just running the audio interface and the iLock, and certainly never had a problem running all three with power connected. So I think the base station drains a little bit too much. So there are, essentially what we're saying is there are limits to what you can do with that USB 3 port by itself without power. So that can work. In another video we're going to be looking at how many things you can actually plug in and how well that works with a fully tweaked system. We'll also be looking at the dock to see what that does and whether that has a really positive effect on it. But ultimately, on battery, keyboard interface, iLock, yeah, that's pretty good. We like that, so that works all right for us. One last thing we can do is plug in another screen. And run Pro Tools like that. Why not? Why wouldn't you do that if you had the opportunity? So let's run it. But this is all ignoring one fundamental thing, which is the Surface's inherent portability. Reflections might be a bit of an issue. When you hold me in your arms so tight, you let me know everything's alright. Hooked on a feeling, I'm high on believing. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and join us again. We'll be doing stuff on Cubase, on Ableton. We'll be doing some reviews of things like FL Studio Groove and Stage Light and other bits and pieces. So subscribe, come and see us, talk to us, tell us about what you're doing on your Surface Pro 3, and let's see how mad this can get. See you next time.